Hi, and welcome to this video presentation on anxiety. I'm Lindley Craig, NLP trainer, and I'll be your guide through this session. And let's explore what anxiety is from an NLP perspective. In this presentation, I'm going to first discuss about why we're learning about anxiety. And then I'm going to talk about what exactly is anxiety from a clinical perspective, as well as how we look at it from an NLP perspective. And then we're going to also learn about how we do anxiety. And so that might kind of sound a little bit strange, but that's actually how NLP looks at it. You'll learn more about that in a second. And at the end, then I just challenge you to take a look at what you noticed. What did you learn? What did you explore? Or what aha moments did you have during this particular video presentation? So first, we're going to start by looking at a GAD-7. Now, this is actually a clinical analysis of anxiety. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and pause the video now to take the GAD-7 assessment. And that will give you an understanding of the next component of our session about what the GAD-7 tells you about your level of anxiety right now. So go ahead and pause the video now and just return back whenever you're done. Now, looking at your score from the GAD-7 assessment, you will see that you can range in 3 different areas for anxiety. So clinically speaking, we're looking at a 6 to 10 score being mild anxiety, a score of 11 through 16 to be moderate anxiety, as well as a score of 17 plus being severe anxiety. So depending on where you fall, kind of gives you an understanding of how potentially, or where potentially you might be in the anxiety realm. Also, it indicates to you how important this video is to you, because we're going to be going over things in this video about what you can do about your anxiety. First, though, we need to look more about what exactly anxiety is. So anxiety is a level of worry, nervousness, or unease about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. So anxiety is future-based, whereas depression is normally past-based or based on things that had occurred already or occurred in our past. So with anxiety, there's often feelings of being on edge or being fearful, afraid, anxious, nervousness, fear of the future in general, or trouble relaxing, as well as a component of irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. So anxiety is a time-related element. As we have already stated, it's a future-based element. And so having anxiety, or what normal people say is to have anxiety, is all relative to how much of this worriedness and nervousness and unease that you have in a given period of time. So anxiety disorders are recognized medically in very different formats. So first, we have generalized anxiety, anxiousness about a number of things over most days, and common over for more than 6 months. So that's when we would talk to somebody about generalized anxiety. Now, social anxiety is a fear of attending public events, so it's a very special form of anxiety. Then we have anxiety like panic disorders, which are panic attacks or loss of control over body and emotions, a feeling of sickness or dizziness, shortness of breath, and the feeling that you're in great danger. Normally this is what a person goes through in a panic attack. Another type of anxiety that's medically recognized is obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. These are intrusive thoughts and fears which cause anxiety and lead to behaviors that are normally ritual-based. So somebody, for example, opening and closing a door several times before being able to actually go through the door. Or another common OCD element is washing hands and a fear of germs. Another element of anxiety that is medically recognized is phobias, so fearful of a particular object or a situation, and that fear actually would interfere with somebody's life. So a fear of spiders is not if it's not an overwhelming fear and it's not intruding on your life, isn't necessarily a phobia. But if you were unable to move throughout your house because you thought your house was infested by spiders, then that's obviously interfering with your life. Another one is agoraphobia, which is a specific fear of crowded places or enclosed public spaces. To further understand what anxiety is, we'll look at the stages of anxiety. So at first, somebody is conscious of their anxiety, which means that they understand that the anxiety is there. And there's an event that might be coming up. They're consciously thinking about that event, and they're also consciously thinking about what could be going wrong during that event. So what happens in the unconscious stage is a person continuously has this conscious awareness of anxiety, and then it becomes like a habit for the brain to do this worrying thing over and over and over again. So it becomes an unconscious habit. So the person has gotten better at doing anxiety and has an event coming up, but now instead of consciously worrying about it, they're unconsciously worrying about it. They'll feel anxious about something in the future, and they won't know why they feel anxious. So the next level of anxiety is just general anxiousness. And this is where it starts becoming a person who has an anxiousness about possibly having anxiety. And then, of course, the next stage being the person having anxiety about having anxiety. So this is the stage at which they're anxious most of the time. The next stage is that they fear being caught in places where they're so anxious that they will need to be able to be near an exit or like at the end of an aisle in a movie theater or end of an aisle in a plane. The next level of anxiety or stage of anxiety is in IBS or panic attacks, so irritable bowel syndrome, and so the person might experience constant bowel issues, or they'll have or they might have panic attacks, which often lead to a feeling of having a heart attack. The next stage that happens is that they start limiting the places that they go, and they avoid flying or motorways, then roads, and then smaller roads. So lastly, they actually stay at home and don't leave their house. So the medical community often prescribes drugs such as serotonin reuptake inhibitors or antidepressants to people with anxiety issues. In NLP, we do things a little bit differently. So as you can hear from the things that I've said so far, from an NLP's perspective, we look at anxiety as something that somebody does rather than something that somebody has. So anxiety isn't an object. You can't have it. You can't put it in your pocket. It's what we call an NLP nominalization. As it's written in the English language, it's a noun, i.e. representing something that is tangible, but it actually has no tangible aspects to it. So anxiety is when somebody is doing anxiety. So it's a state of being, it's a state of doing. So it's technically a verb, and this is the thing that differentiates NLP from the standard medical community, because we look at anxiety as something that can be undone. It's not something that needs to be treated because it's an affliction that somebody has something chemically wrong with them. It's just something that they can undo because, just need to learn how not to do it. And that's what we're here to do today. All right. First, I'd like you to think about lunch. In fact, I'd like to go to lunch. I want you to imagine that we're going to go to lunch. We're going to a place where you normally go, And there are 3 places that you would go in this particular area. Write down the 3 places that you would go into the area that you normally go to have lunch. So go ahead and pause the video now and write down those 3 places that we would go to lunch if we were to go. Okay, you have your 3 places. Now, pick one of those places for us to go to lunch and write it down. And now, imagine we're going to go to that area, to that place for lunch. What would you be thinking about as we are headed to that particular destination for lunch? So once you have all of those answers written down, go ahead and move on, or pause the video if you need more time. We'll come back to the lunch question later. First, I want to talk about how we motivate ourselves, because it's very important when we look at it from an anxiety perspective. We motivate ourselves in our lives by going away from negative stuff or pressure buildup or towards positive stuff like desire, wanting, or a goal. If you think about a hobby, hobbies are mostly toward activities. Taxes, on the other hand, are mostly away from activities. When you're away from, you're doing it because you have to do it, not necessarily because you want to do it or you have a desire to do it. The cool thing about our motivation is that we are motivated in different ways as compared to the context in which we are in. So different context, different type of motivation. And motivation is also on a continuum scale. So we can be very far away from in certain circumstances and very towards in other circumstances. And we can be anywhere in between. People who have anxiety have more away from motivators in their lives. They have an understanding that there is too much to do and not enough time to do it in. They often leave things until it's almost too late and feel very rushed and pressured to get things done. And the other aspect of people who have anxiety is that they make decisions less effectively than other people. For normal people who make decisions easily, there comes a point in time that there's a decision to be made, and they make it. And that's how their decision strategy works. And you can see it represented here. A timeline where a decision has come upon in that timeline, and that decision is finished and the time continues on. Now, someone who doesn't have a good decision-making strategy comes to a decision and they look for other options. They feel that perhaps maybe they don't have enough information, and they need to add more factors into their determination about the decision before they make it. They often complicate the decision because they unconsciously are trying to avoid it. So pressure builds up because the decision hasn't been made, and they worry about it, and that worry continues through time. Now, as pressure builds, the person goes off and does other tasks to alleviate the pressure. And we call this procrastination. You might also hear someone who has trouble making decisions say things like, "I like to think on things," or "I just like to mull them over for a while," or "I like just putting things in the back of my mind and then think about them for a bit." So these are unconscious excuses for why the decision hasn't been made. While they're doing other tasks, the pressure continues to build until they make a decision, or out of not making a decision, the decision is actually made for them. But wait, there's even more to this complicated decision-making process. The other step that people who with bad decision-making strategies do is that they question whether or not they've made the right decision. So they may give themselves a new deadline or rethink the situation, or they will continue to mull it over, not making the decision. So this is another complication where the decision doesn't actually get made, and even if it does get made, the person continues to worry about it. The interesting thing is it takes up so much of our brain's energy because there isn't actually just one of these decisions. There are several. So these are the things that are going on in somebody who has anxiety. All these different decision-making strategies for every type of decision that they need to make, and each one of them looping and looping over and over and over again. Let me give you some examples of some poor decision-making. Do you remember that lunch question that I asked you about at the very beginning? Well, these are some of the answers that were received from some participants in an anxiety study. With the lunch question, a female respondent struggled to choose from the 3 places that came to mind. She thought of the 3, then of a 4th, wondering if it was better. She then couldn't choose one, asking, well, which would you like? Then, when asked to decide and pick one, she eventually did, and when asked why she chose that particular one, she said she thought about it and liked it and chose that. And then when she imagined driving to lunch, she was saying to herself, I think I chose the wrong one. Maybe I should have chosen one of the other 2. This lady has the ability to make decisions like a child. Another gentleman who had also participated in an anxiety program, when he was asked about the lunch question, he couldn't answer the question at all. He became very angry with himself. And when we checked what went on, we learned that he had a common decision-making strategy that goes like this. I asked myself what I want for lunch. I couldn't think of what I wanted. My mind was blank. So I told myself off for being an idiot. Then I felt bad. Then I said in a loud voice to myself, pick a place now. Then I said to myself, why does this always happen to me? And then I felt worse. This guy worked in a job where some tasks meant he had to make decisions fast, competently, and often they were very complex decisions. He had no issues making decisions in his workplace. When it came to make decisions in his life, he struggled really badly. Another female who was going through the anxiety program said, my friend calls me and asks me if I want to go to the movies tonight. I say I'm in the middle of something and will call them back. I call either of my 2 best friends or my sister. I tell them what's happened and I ask them if they think I should go, and we discuss it. And then I ask them what movie they suggest, and then I'll call my friend back and tell them I want to go, and how about we see a movie, this one or this one. Again, this lady had the decision-making ability of a young child because she was unable to make decisions for herself. She always required outside assistance. So do you remember this guy? This is the guy who has a perfectly acceptable decision-making strategy. So this is a decision that normally occurs. Time is there, the decision comes up, the decision is made, and time passes. Now, this is how it would normally look in a given week. On Monday, this particular gentleman has 4 decisions. He makes all 4, so he's good. On Tuesday, 4 more decisions come in, and he makes 2 of them, but gets caught up in stuff, so he leaves 2 for Wednesday. So when Wednesday comes, he has 4 new decisions to make and the 2 left over from the previous day. Again, he makes only 2 decisions, the ones from Tuesday. So on Thursday, he has 4 new decisions and 4 decisions left from Wednesday. He works really hard on Thursday and he makes all of the decisions. So on Friday, he just has 4 new decisions to make. Again, this is what it looks like for somebody who has a normal decision-making strategy. Let's look at somebody who has anxiety. So on Monday, they have 4 decisions. And because of the fact that they have trouble making decisions, they don't make any decisions on Monday. So on Tuesday, now they have 8 decisions. And their strategy is to let the decisions sit in the back of their mind until the pressure builds up. So on Wednesday, they don't have 4 decisions, they have 12 decisions. Now, they feel like they have too much to do and not enough time because on Thursday, they have 16 decisions. This person is starting to feel overwhelmed and anxious because on Friday, they have 20 decisions. So they may go out with their friends and have a few drinks and forget about life for a while because it's all too much. So which way have you been making decisions? Now, remember I had asked you to go to lunch. And the first question I asked was, what were the 3 places in your area where you would normally go to lunch? Did you have a problem deciding on just 3? The next thing that you wrote down was the place you decided to go for lunch. Did you hesitate to pick one and instead wonder, well, what do I want to do? Or what do your instructor want to do for lunch? Or did you say, I don't know? Or maybe question whether you should wait until we actually get there to decide? The next question asked you, what would you be thinking on the way to lunch? Did you think about what you will eat? Or were you thinking about whether or not you made the right decision? If you were thinking about what to eat, then you didn't second guess your original decision. You moved on to the next decision. If you second guessed the first decision in the first place, or whether I would like it, or that we should decide when we get there, or that you've added more than 3 choices, then you might have a problem with making decisions. And you could be adding anxiety to your life that you don't need. Now, one of the things that's very interesting about decision making is that decision making is 100% emotional. The reason that we know this is because of the fact that when somebody experiences brain damage in the emotional centers of the brain, they have an inability to make decisions. They can tell you why logically one choice might be better than the other choice, but they can't actually choose. They have an inability to make a decision. So because of this, if we use our emotions to make decisions and we're feeling overwhelmed and stress and this cortisol from stress goes racing through our bodies, we're actually inhibiting our decision-making ability by having negative emotions going on. The problem with this, of course, is it creates a vicious cycle. The more we worry, the less apt we are at making decisions and the inability for us to make a good decision in the first place. So as you can see, it's really important for us to get some clear understanding of what the anxiety is and how we can go about stopping ourselves from doing it. So how do you overcome anxiety? My challenge to you is to go through what you've learned so far and figure out what did you notice. How would you overcome anxiety knowing about your motivation and your decision-making strategies? So pause the video now and go through your notes and see what you can discover before we go on and reveal some of the ways that you can overcome anxiety. So one of the ways, of course, from the toward and away from motivational strategy is to find a toward for every away from. For example, if you think about two buildings, each 100 stories tall, and if I put a plank in between the two buildings and asked you to walk across the plank to the other building 100 stories in the air, would you really do it? What happens if I were to put $100 on the other building? Would you walk from one building to another? Probably not. What if I put $1 million on the other building? Would you walk across the plank to go get it? So for some people, $1 million is their toward motivation. They would go across the plank for that $1 million. For some, that wasn't motivation enough. So the next question is, if you're on that building, 100 stories in the air, and there's a plank to the building next door, if I tell you that the building you're on is currently on fire and the only way to save your life is to go across that plank, would you? So this is what we would consider to be an away from motivation. You're trying to get away from the fire. And one last one for you, just in case. So, you're on the building, it's not on fire, and there's a plank to the other building on the other side. And your loved one, whether it's your partner or spouse or perhaps a child, is on the other building, and that building's on fire. Would you walk across the plank to go get your loved one and bring them back to safety? Again, this is a toward motivation. We're trying to accomplish something that is a future-oriented goal, to be able to save the life of someone else. And it could also be a little bit away from, i.e., away from the pain that that person would experience, or away from loss. So, always remember that when you are dealing with something that it has anxiety related to it, you have to not only think about what you're trying to get away from, it's what are you trying to go towards. So we have a process in NLP where we will use this technique where we say cancel, erase, and what do I want instead? So every time something happens that comes to your mind that you're going to worry or be nervous about, ask yourself, cancel, erase, and then ask yourself, what do I want instead? So that allows you to get a toward for every away from motivation. Next is to become very aware of catching yourself mulling over decisions. If you have written on a to-do list to decide on something, then you know that you're mulling over decisions because you put it on a to-do list to actually do it. So you haven't actually done it yet. So don't put off a decision. Just go ahead and make it. Catch yourself also procrastinating decisions. Have you put some decisions aside because of the fact that you need to do other things? Have you started other tasks and put off making the decision? Again, some of the times that we're doing these things and not making these decisions isn't because we're consciously trying to avoid them. It's because it's our unconscious habit to do so. Also, be aware of beating yourself up for not making decisions or making the wrong decisions. As you heard in our example earlier, it didn't help the gentleman to be sitting there beating himself up because he couldn't decide on where to go to lunch. It's much better to have a strategy of where to go to lunch. Practice making decisions each week, and this is where we'll talk about the strategy. One of the easiest ways to enhance your decision-making ability is by narrowing your decisions down to 3 and never having more than just 3 decisions and having that as part of your decision-making strategy. Another technique that you can use to help you make decisions is writing out the pros and cons of each of your choices. And remember to always focus on 3 and never more than 3 choices. Brainstorming and mind mapping also help when deciding on something or going through a decision-making process. Instead of putting off gathering the information, brainstorm the information, collect all of the information, and make your decision. Take ownership of your decision-making and let others' decision-making go. Those are other people's stuff. So if somebody else has a problem with decision-making, it's not your problem to deal with. So one of the examples that I often use is that my husband asks me about, what do I want to drink every day when he comes home from work? Do I want a cocktail? Do I want a glass of wine? Do I want a beer? Do I just want some soda water? Or whatever it is. He always asks the same questions. And I always tell him, I've made the decision about what to have for dinner without involving you at all. So you can decide what we're drinking with dinner all by yourself. So it's not my problem to get involved in his decision-making strategy. Also, the thing that you need to check for are fears and phobias that can be inhibiting your ability to make decisions or increasing your level of anxiety. So in NLP, we look at phobias and fears that are something that need to be cleared to be able to help somebody to overcome anxiety. So if you do have phobias and fears that are causing anxious reactions in your life, then please do see an NLP coach because they can help you to eliminate them. All right, so those are the techniques that you can use to stop doing anxiety. And just remember that another fantastic way of overcoming anxiety and other personal problems is by continuously learning and developing yourself. And thank you very much for your attention on this video on anxiety. I'll see you next time.